Why would a modern rabbi be dedicated to teaching about the Jewishness of Jesus, Paul, and the New Testament? Well, today on the Bridge Builders Forum, I'm sitting down with Rabbi Joe Charnes, who does that very thing. Rabbi Joe is one of a growing number of Jewish voices deeply committed to building bridges between Jews and Christians. So this is an honest and hopeful conversation about faith, friendship, and what's possible when Jews and Christians listen and learn across boundaries. Rabbi Joe, it is wonderful to have you not only as a guest on the Bridge Builders Forum, but how about it? We've got Rabbi Joe right here in the studio. So great to see you today.
Yeah, thank you. I'm delighted to be here, and I'm also honored. And I'm truly looking forward to our dialogue today, a dialogue of exploration.
Yeah.
That may not end with resolution or answers, but just the fact that we're in dialogue, the joy of dialogue.
Yeah.
I'm really looking forward to this, and I'm actually honored that after our brief conversation that we had, you thought I'm a worthy dialogue partner.
I do. Of course, we haven't known each other for that long. Rabbi Joe and I actually met at SBL, the Society of Biblical Literature, not that long ago, the last SBL. And of course, we have a dear mutual friend, Damian Eisner. And so he introduced us and we became fast friends. And of course, just both very interested in Jewish Christian dialogue and all these all this crazy stuff that we're into. But I think it's going to be, I really I think folks are going to enjoy hearing what you do and your perspective.
Thank you.
And your work as a rabbi in Jewish Christian relations, dialogue. And I know you even do beyond that, which is for another conversation, but you are into interfaith dialogue with not just in the Jewish Christian realm, but beyond that as well. So I think that's awesome. But hey, let's start with a little bit of your story. So how does a rabbi like yourself get interested in Jewish Christian dialogue and relations and that kind of stuff? Would love to hear just a little of your story.
All right. It is a long and winding journey.
Sounds like a song. You're going to start singing?
Oh! I've had 1 hour or less than 1 hour of sleep last night. I took a red eye to come and see my friend. So
yes, thank you. I appreciate that, and I'm sure our guests
forgiveness in advance.
All right. It's been stated. So
thank you.
You're clear.
But it was a journey, and it's interesting. And you can rein me in if I wax on too long.
Okay.
But it's a journey that actually led me on a journey to a very different place than where I started. And I had always been curious as a youth. I can say that now as I'm turning more gray. But I was always curious. And I liked exploring and seeking to understand. And in fact, you may not remember this, but inquiring minds want to know. You remember the Inquirer? I remember that. It was a tabloid.
Inquiring minds want to know.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's a great line, inquiring minds.
Who was that?
It was the Inquirer.
The National Inquirer. Yes. That was their little jingle. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I'm almost certain it was them. I remember seeing it in the market when I was in line probably 40 years ago.
Out in the grocery store.
I don't think they have it anymore, do they?
I don't know.
But I remember about 40 years ago, I saw that after Elvis and JFK obviously were dead, that they were alive in a Polish convalescent home. So it's good information from the National Enquirer.
Oh, always.
But
always interesting.
Inquiring minds want to know.
Yeah.
I was always drawn to inquiry, broad inquiry, and not just one concept or idea, but to see competing ideas and how they interfaced and related to each other. And in college and university, philosophy was my minor because I loved, again, exploring ideas.
Makes sense. Sounds like a good fit.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And I was fascinated by how brilliant minds could see life through such different prisms or perspective or ideological prisms. And what I noticed in the exploration of the philosophical ideas of one branch of philosophy is logic. So you learn how to think. And then epistemology. What is knowledge? What are ways of knowing? And all of the other areas of philosophy that are, do we have freedom of choice, or is everything determined?
Right.
The mind, is there something distinct about the mind versus the brain? Is there, in terms of ethics and morals and values, are there absolutes, or is there just simply ethical relativism?
Yeah.
How about in philosophy of religion? We have many different approaches to faith. Mm-hmm. And whether it's theism or deism or atheism or pantheism or panentheism, etc. And then there's even non-theistic faiths in the East. So what I noticed in all of my studies was there was a significant lack of thinkers within Judaism. And I don't mean there weren't Jews. I mean, there were Jewish thinkers, and maybe 40 years ago it was different. Mm-hmm. Maybe today philosophy books include more, but there were Jewish thinkers, but they weren't really representing Judaism. The main Jew that they had that I recall was Spinoza, who's not exactly, yes, he's Jewish and he's an important thinker, but I wouldn't call him within the framework of normative Jewish thought,
on the spectrum of Jewish. I gotcha. Yeah.
So I decided then that I needed to explore my own heritage and my own wisdom tradition to see where my thinkers, would lead me along these same areas of that are really rich in to explore. But I began in college studying Judaism and Jewish history and Jewish thought, but I also at the same time began a practice, and I went Orthodox. That was I studied other faiths, and I still met with other people, Reform, conservative. I was never isolated, but my practice and my way was Orthodox.
So you didn't grow up Orthodox, but as you were sort of reconnecting with Jewish practice, Orthodox is kind of the path you went down. Yeah, got it.
Engaged with others, and along that study period and practice period, in my early 20s, I met a group of people that I had no idea even existed. They were called Messianic Jews.
Wow. Yeah.
Jews for Jesus and Company.
So what year was this approximately? And he's going back a little bit.
This would have now I got to do addition or subtraction. What year are we in? It would have been in the 80s. Early 80s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
Late 65, 75, 85. Sorry, late 80s.
Okay.
Mid to late 80s, yeah. And that's when I met. I had already been practicing and studying, but I met the Messianics in the mid to late 80s. And being curious again and interested, I thought I would attend sometimes, but I also started studying. And I remember the first work that I ever studied, which was Moshe Rosen, Yeshua.
Yeah.
And it reminded me, whenever I saw it, the first time I saw it, I should say, it reminded me of Neapolitan ice cream for whatever reason, because it's brown and
right.
bluish.
It's got the different flavors.
It's got those wonderful
the sections.
Yeah. So I began studying Messianic Judaism and also within Judaism and seeing how it matched up. But what I realized over the years, I did this for a few years, I realized that I really wasn't studying. I was actually reading to disprove. I was reading to counter, not to actually study what the wisdom was that they were trying to offer. So I never fully understood. And so I guess I would say I was reading to discount, not to discover.
Yeah.
And it was painful. Oh,
big difference.
It was an honest, I'm glad I had that realization, because then what I did is I began studying again from the beginning. Moshe Rosen and Company. And now there are obviously more works than there were back then. But not only did I study Messianic thought, I also began to study Christianity more broadly in terms of theology. And I went then into the New Testament and the parables and Jesus. And over the last 35 or so years, all the different incarnations that have taken place in New Testament studies, especially with Paul, which is an area I know that is dear to you. So
right.
I guess that's the short answer to your long question of how
that was very helpful.
got
And to be
into
clear,
Jewish
you
Christian
were
studies.
doing that. You were never, currently nor at any point in that journey. It was just something for you as a Jew that you wanted to. That's how you got into sort of this realm. But I want to make sure everybody's very clear that you're not messianic. You're not. You're still very much in a mainstream Jewish space. Let's just say, but you were engaging these texts to discover. I love how you put that. The difference between discovering the wisdom and trying to understand it on, I guess, the terms.
On its own terms. Because it's always easy to read something and make a caricature of it and then disprove it or discard it.
Yeah.
But there are decent people who have very, very intelligent minds that you have to give it a fair read. And you listen. And we don't often do that well because we come more from often a defensive place. Has to be my way. And how could they? My initial thought, honestly, was when I said I wanted to know more about them. Yeah. My initial reaction was more, what happened in your life?
Yeah.
That made you go down that, rather than it was the wisdom that was calling you. And I'm saying that honestly, because that wasn't a fair read either, but that was my internal instinct that something happened, because you can't be a Jew and believe in Jesus.
Right.
Right? That's the normative thought. So that's where I was coming from.
Right. But trying to understand it on its own terms, I know has been a part of your path and helping you to understand these documents. So let's talk about just historically. I think for many good reasons, you're an exception in the sense that Jewish people, Jews, and the Jewish community more broadly has been reluctant to engage with Christianity, Christian texts, but that's changed. That is changing. So it's changed, I would say, radically in some ways in modern times. And you're, I would say, a reflection of that change. So talk to us about this history and how and why things have progressed. Let's just say on the Jewish side.
Okay.
Regarding engagement with Jesus, Paul, the New Testament, and even just building relationships with Christians. Because I know this is all, you have a reason why you're doing this. I mean, you're trying to I know, build relationships and understanding and so forth. But anyway, back to the question, why has there been the reluctance on the Jewish side for kind of the path you've gone down?
Yeah. And maybe we'll leave Paul out, and we'll
come back to Paul.
And I'll see if I can bring Jesus in also. And I did this, by the way. I had to keep it under wraps.
Yeah,
that wasn't
kosher.
Exactly. But yeshiva, certainly not. I couldn't.
Yeah.
Couldn't have the New Testament there while I'm studying the Talmud.
Yeah.
But Rabbi David Wolpe, who's a wonderful human being and also a very thoughtful rabbi, not messianic. He's a conservative rabbi out in the LA area. I'm assuming he's still there. He once said regarding Jews studying Christianity, he said that when Christians study Jesus, they study with the weight of theology. Okay? Theology is their focus. But when Jews study Jesus or Christianity, we study with the weight of history. And we know what the history has been very often.
Yeah.
Sadly, it's been horrific as far as the Jewish-Christian relations, which we'll touch on maybe later. But we know what history has been like living under Christian rule or among Christians in the past. And it's very hard, I would say, for Jews to want or to be interested in studying Jesus when living under the people who follow Jesus are treating us in such ways that
Yeah.
are monstrous.
Yeah.
So there really wasn't this huge draw. What's genuinely just tragic is we both come from the same root.
Mm.
Christianity comes out of our faith. We are both rooted in the same heritage. And that we didn't live together and love together and serve God and humanity together is tragic.
Yeah.
It really is. And I think the roots of it, we have to explore. And it began obviously in the New Testament times with Jesus and Paul and the gospel writers. And it continued well beyond that. Mm-hmm. But it really did begin then. And I'm not saying that the treatment that Jews received under Christian rule was anything that was taught in the New Testament. And we'll come to that.
Sure.
But the basis of that was, I think what else could it have been? It was the New Testament. And again, I think it's a gross misrepresentation and misunderstanding of what the New Testament is teaching.
Okay.
But over the years, throughout history, Jews have been called Christ killers.
Yeah.
God murderers, parasites, vermin. We've been accused with the blood libel, of killing children to get their blood for Passover, right, for our matzah. We've had to wear garments that identified who we were. This was at the Fourth Lateran Council under Pope Innocent III.
Yeah.
In the early 1200s, we had to wear identifying markers, as did Muslims.
Yeah.
And then that spread to England, where it was not particularly pleasant either. In fact, sometimes we had to wear 10 Commandments. And other places in French territories, we would wear a rota, which is a red badge or a yellow badge on the front and back to identify. Abraham al Sancta Clara in the late 1600s, he was an Augustinian monk. Mm-hmm. He said, next to Satan, listen to this language, next to Satan, there's no greater enemy to Christians than the Jews.
Yeah.
Wagner, so that's religious. Let's go to culture.
The composer.
Richard Wagner. He said that the Jews are the enemy of humanity.
So this is now even more recent.
Yes.
Yeah.
And all that is noble within it. In fact, talk about recent, another Catholic priest, he was also the president of the Republic of Slovakia, Father Joseph Tiso. He said that it is a Christian action to expel Jews, thus removing the pests.
Yeah.
So Christ killers, badges, we're the enemy of humanity. How did this happen?
Yeah.
It is rude. They were all Christian. So it wasn't the Bhagavad Gita that was motivating them.
Right.
So I think if we look through some texts, we might hear an echo.
Sure.
A very, very distorted.
And I think that's a key word.
It is.
You see
it is grossly distorting.
And when you look at the New Testament as a rabbi and as a Jewish, with a Jewish mind, you see how the New Testament has been weaponized. You see that as a distortion.
I do. And I do read the New Testament. I study it regularly, and I study it in Greek. I know Greek, ancient Greek, not modern. But the question remains, where did it come from? They wouldn't have found this in the Bhagavad Gita or some Buddhist sutra.
Yeah.
So what do we do with this? Let's go through a few verses. Remember some of the themes that we developed. We'll go through a few verses here.
Yeah, no, please. I think folks will love to hear just these specific, a couple examples of texts that have been weaponized.
Yes.
And that's the key. They've been weaponized.
Well, let's see what they say and see how they heard them.
Sure.
And let's go through a few of them if we can. This is an important, I think, area to understand. not to blame this
Yeah,
text.
yeah.
But let's
right.
go to Acts 13:26. It says, brothers, this is just from the ESV. Brothers, sons of the family of Abraham, and those among you who fear God, to us has been sent the message of this salvation. For those who live in Jerusalem and their rulers, because they did not recognize him, not Jesus, nor understand the utterances of the prophets, which are read every Sabbath, fulfilled them by condemning him, fulfilled them, the words of the prophets, by condemning him, and though they found no guilt in him, the Jews found no guilt in him, worthy of death, they asked Pilate to have him executed. Christ killers.
Yep.
Let's go to Matthew 23.
Yeah, that's
This
Matthew
is the
23
woes.
is the woe. Yeah,
It's a tough
that's
one.
a tough chapter. Yeah,
It is, but
Yes.
remember, we're the enemies of humanity.
Mm-hmm.
Enemies of humanity. Murderers. So it speaks of woes. It's the woe to the scribes and the Pharisees who are the hypocrites, and they're blind guides, and they're blind men, and they're blind fools. And they are full of greed and self-indulgence. This is not high praise.
Right.
For a human being. If we go to Matthew 27, it's not much better, where the crowd chooses
His blood be on our hands, right? Yeah.
yes, and
Right.
but not only does that, it chooses. They had at this time once a year you get to release either somebody who is going to be executed, and Jesus was up there with a lovely criminal, right, Barabbas. And the chief priests, 27:20. Now the chief priests and elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and destroy Jesus. Okay, that's 21. They all said, let's go to 22. Pilate said to them, this is like exonerating Pilate.
Right.
Then what shall I do with Jesus who is called Christ? They all said, let him be crucified. And Pilate says, why? What evil has he done? But they shouted all the more, let him be crucified.
Yeah.
And Pilate says in verse 24, I am innocent of this man's blood. And then 25, and all the people, all the Jews answered, his blood be upon us and upon our children. Paul, this is another doozy, First Thessalonians 2, 14 through 16. You know the verse.
Oh, yeah. But know it well. Yeah.
It's a difficult, it's one of Paul's strongest statements. He says, for you, brothers, became imitators of churches of God in Christ Jesus that are in Judea. For you suffered the same things from your own countrymen as they did from the Jews, who killed both the Lord Jesus and the prophets and drove us out, and ready, and displease God and oppose all mankind, all humanity. And the end is, but the wrath has come upon us.
Yeah.
If we listen to that, they killed the Lord Jesus.
Yeah.
And they oppose, they are displeasing to God.
Right.
And they oppose all mankind, all humanity.
Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah. It's tough verse.
So that sounds like what we were speaking of before.
Yeah.
With Wagner, the enemy of humanity. We're Christ killers. Okay, the wrath, that's the thing. But wrath has come upon them at last. And that's eis telos. It's at last is fine, but it's like, it's to the end. In the end, they got their just rewards, their just deserts.
Yeah.
Those,
it's harsh.
We'll
it's
go
harsh
through
statement.
other texts later, or more texts, but this language is here.
Yes.
And if you have hatred in your heart, this is like pouring kerosene on a bonfire.
Yes.
It's going to inflame it. We can have another discussion. Why is this language here? That's a fair discussion.
Yeah.
But what happened as a result of this language is unconscionable. And Paul and Jesus and Matthew and every single New Testament writer would have been horrified at what was done in the name of their writings.
Yes.
So then the question is, what did it change? How did it change, right?
Yeah. How did those texts become used in such a negative way?
Well,
I mean, obviously the seed, you can see just the
oh,
language.
Yeah,
if
the
we're
language
honest,
is there.
If we're honest, the tools are there to be used in a negative way. But what I hear you saying is that they would be mortified.
Yes.
As to how those texts have been used. That's how you read it.
I absolutely, there is no way that any follower of Jesus would have justified or even ever considered harming one of their non-Christ following Jewish brothers or sisters. So the question then is, what changed?
Yeah, what happened?
Yeah, let maybe for another discussion.
Yeah.
Well, it's sort of, let's discuss how it's been fixed, possibly, maybe. Let's look at that, because the question then is, go ahead. Yes.
No, I think I want to make sure that I kind of acknowledge, like the question I asked was why has there been reluctance on the part of the Jewish community to engage with Christian texts and Christians who obviously who embrace these and hold these up as, as holy and as scripture. And I think that you've answered that question really well. When these ideas are being used as they have been, understandably, there's been reluctance, but thankfully you and many others, I'd say in this generation and in recent generations, are rethinking those texts and trying to understand those, put those texts, I would say, back into their context and try to present interpretations and understandings that maybe de-weaponize those texts. Would you say that that's...
Yeah. My language isn't weaponized.
Okay.
And that's how you demean Jews.
Yeah.
So the language is, you can hear that echo. That ancient echo is just reverberating in the language of people filled with hate. So they demean Jews, but they also demean Judaism, which we didn't go through those texts. We'll do that maybe in a few moments. Again, not that that they're accurately interpreted, but the language is there as a base. Yeah. So I think what's interesting to ask is, how did this change? Yeah. Not from. I'm saying, how did it change from the 70 years ago, 100 years ago, throughout history, demonizing Jews? How did it turn now with the same texts to treating Jews within the Christian world today much better? What was the shift there? And I think, I'm not a great historian, but my sense from reading is that, sadly, it was the Holocaust that did cause this paradigm shift. Yeah. And what I mean by this is, Christian theologians, it started with theologians and scholars. They asked, is Christianity inherently, at its core, anti-Semitic? And that's a fair question, because if you're looking at the treatment throughout history of the followers, who again are misinterpreting, please, I am not saying this is Holy Writ, what they're following. They are following unholy writ. But they began to ask themselves, is Christianity inherently anti-Semitic? And in fact, in the words of Rosemary Ruther, who wrote Faith and Fratricide, because it is killing their brothers, she says that, this is her quote, anti-Semitism is, quote, the other side of Christology. She's a Christian. She's a Christian theologian. Okay. Yeah. She says it is.
So she says it is inherent.
Yes, she does. Now, most scholars don't agree with that, and neither do I,
you.
Just up front.
Right.
But, so what happened then was, in the Christian world, they began not to ask anymore, is Christianity inherently anti-Semitic? could Christianity have played a role in some way that contributed to the conditions that led to the Holocaust?
Mm.
And I think that was a realization that hit home.
Yeah.
Because the answer has to be yes. There were factors that contributed.
Right.
Not the meaning. I know the language.
Right.
You have to have a sick, hateful mind to do what's been done to Jews throughout history in the name of Jesus or Paul.
Right. Right.
But there are contributing factors. And so that realization or that honest recognition, I think, began a new form of dialogue because it offered now the Christian world an opportunity to make amends, to make reconciliation, and to begin a dialogue that says, how can we work better together? How can we see your texts in a way that are more favorable, more honest? Maybe we can even start recognizing, we'll stay with Jesus right now, not Paul.
Yeah.
Well, Paul was Jewish, but the Jewishness of Jesus.
Yeah.
So there was a more honoring, open discussion that I think was a tragic result of the Holocaust. That it took that.
Yeah.
Why couldn't this have been seen? I don't understand for the life of me. You want to ask, how did it change and turn dark? I have no idea how somebody could follow Jesus, who says, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you and bless those who curse you, and is the Prince of Peace in Christian thought and does such violence to another human being.
Yeah.
I don't understand it. And
it's
I
an
never
aberration.
Will. It's a gross, worse than an aberration. So
I want to continue. Yeah. No, thank you for saying that. I want to continue down this line of how I want to hear more, and I think our audience would love to hear more about how you see Jesus as a rabbi. Obviously the Jewish community collectively, nor you personally, Rabbi Joe Charnes, embraces Jesus as the Messiah, but many Jewish thinkers see him in a much more positive light, especially in recent generations.
It sounded like you said, I embrace.
No, do not.
Do not. I didn't hear the not.
Sorry.
I'm the one who's tired.
Do not embrace Jesus as the Messiah. Sorry. The Jewish community, Rabbi Joe Charnes, you do not embrace him as the Messiah. However, there has been definitely this trend in recent times to see him in a much more positive light, and the New Testament in a much more positive light. So let's just talk about, what is your take on Jesus and his teachings, and do you think he should be understood as a Jewish teacher?
Okay. Rabbi David Wolpe again. Before, who cares what I think, let me stand on the shoulders of giants. Rabbi David Wolpe, who's also not messianic. He's a rabbi you would enjoy listening to and having a dialogue with. Kind man.
Yeah, real pioneer in this realm.
Yeah, he said it's time for Jews to begin anew, exploring the life and the thought and philosophy of Jesus.
It's radical.
Yeah. He also said in his studies of Jesus, he was struck, this is his language, struck again and again about the parallels that he saw within his own faith that were being taught by Jesus. Yes, Jesus, we don't have writings going back that far technically, but our heritage goes back, we don't have the codified document. The Mishnah has people in it before Jesus, but we don't have the documents.
Right.
In codified form written, because they just didn't exist.
Yeah,
they were
because Mishnah was written down, started
1800
couple hundred years after Jesus.
But that doesn't mean it wasn't it wasn't oral, or there weren't things that were written.
Right.
But it's just we don't have them. But so he was struck by how often he saw his own tradition in the words of Jesus.
Yeah.
A great scholar, he's an Orthodox scholar, David Flusser.
Yeah.
I'm sure you know. Great scholar. And fluent in Hebrew and in very, very well studied in Judaism and also in classics. And he knew Greek. Mm-hmm. He says that Jesus, it's a truism. This is his language, a truism, that Jesus was a Jew and wanted to remain within the Jewish faith. He spoke of Jesus' parables. It's beyond doubt, without doubt.
Yeah.
They belong within the Jewish rabbinic parallel world.
Yeah.
Parable world, sorry. That's what happens with no sleep. Parallel. Yeah. I'm in a parallel world right now, folks.
No, you're doing good.
But the Jewish parabolic world.
Yeah.
Okay.
A.J. Levine is another one.
A.J.'s modern, right?
Right.
Yes,
she would agree with that 1,000%.
Yes, and Martin Buber, who again was a great thinker, he spoke of, he found in Jesus his great brother. It's his language, his great brother. Right. Flusser again said in The Sage from Galilee, this is another edition, that's an earlier work, and he spoke of, he identifies, again, this is an Orthodox Jew, he identifies with the worldview of Jesus, both in terms of moral and political outlooks. And he said something again that is beautiful, that I wish echoed throughout the Christian world in our history. But he said that the teachings of Jesus always had the potential to remove the greatest evil and suffering in the world. Okay, that's somebody who is not a Messianic Jew saying that.
Yeah.
And he didn't believe, again, in the divinity of Jesus, or he was a scholar.
Right.
But he recognized deep wisdom in the person of Jesus.
Yeah.
And it's tragic that these days we can't, many within the Jewish world, that started, thankfully, it has, you're right.
Yeah.
But it's still a struggle. I often have tension.
Yeah. You've told me you get pushback. I'm talking about on the within the Jewish community for your work.
Elements, within certain elements, and within the Orthodox world, it's not looked upon with great honor and respect. They have their reasons, and they have great thinkers who are, again, wise guides, like Rav Soloveitchik.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
He didn't mind working in terms of social justice or societal, just the betterment of society, but not on theology. Mm-hmm. And I've been in the traditional world, the Orthodox world, I've been considered a Messianic Jew, no matter how many times I say he's not my Lord and Savior. They still think I'm a closet Messianic. I said I'm out of the closet, and I'm not.
But because you're advocating for engagement, I understand.
I had something,
and I understand the reluctance.
Recently, in the last, someone walked up to me who I know. I mean, I know. I've seen him in the synagogue. And he comes up to me on Shabbos, and he says, "Don't think you can hide what you do from us."
Wow.
And I said,
"Oof.
Oh, good Shabbos. How are you?"
In shul. Wow.
And during Kiddush. Yeah. During our, after the prayers.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And I said, just curiously, what do I do? He had she was clueless of what I did. I said, "You want to actually know what I do?" And when I explained it, to his credit, he said, "It's not that bad."
Yeah.
And I said, "Actually, it's quite beautiful."
Yeah.
It's quite beautiful. I've had people in the more liberal Jewish worlds or non-Orthodox, when you go conservative, Reform, Reconstructionist, Renewal, they may not be interested, but there's usually not that aggressive no.
Okay.
They just might not be interested. Although I did have someone say that we're not going to come if you keep talking about Jesus. I said, "What do you mean keep talking about Jesus? I'm teaching before synagogue, before our Sabbath evening service. I was doing comparative theology so that people would understand, not a caricature of Christianity, but a rich presentation of both. Why we're different and where we share certain ideas." And I said, "Why are you saying this now? I have a church group here of over 40 people. What do you want me to say? Him?"
Wait, in the audience?
Yes,
Oh,
they
okay.
were the audience.
Oh, gosh.
And the Jew, I said,
Oh,
why are you having this now? You know
Yeah.
who I am. They said, they don't want to hear about Jesus on Sabbath. I said, it's before Sabbath.
okay.
They didn't care.
Yeah.
Now, these are just narrow people. There's no
Yeah.
theology behind it.
Sure.
It's just narrow. And we're all, to some extent, like that. Thank God I have grown, maybe not fully out of that, but
Yeah.
because we're human.
Sure. Of course.
And we're all tribal in some sense.
We're all tribal, and there's
But
also
this one
there's
is
reflexes that are deeply embedded, I'm sure,
Yes.
in those responses
Yeah.
that I sympathize with, and so I get that, even though I'm sorry that you've had to deal with
Yeah.
those challenges, but I get it.
Yeah, so my response to everybody in general is, well, especially to the Orthodox, is, first of all, times have changed.
Yeah.
Now, it doesn't mean that you can do anything, because times
Right.
have changed, let's have pork.
Right.
But times have changed.
Yeah.
And the cultural conditions that really did keep us apart, at least in America and parts of Europe and in the scholarly world, have broken down significantly.
Yeah.
Number one. And number two, I said, there are Orthodox rabbis who do it. Not many, admittedly, but there are. In fact, one of Rav Soloveitchik's descendants, Mayor Soloveitchik.
Oh, he's huge. He's got a huge platform
He's wonderful.
to Christians. Yeah.
He is wonderful, and it's necessary.
Yeah.
I also say that I can't ask Christians. I give 3 or 4 points. I say I can't ask Christians to study more about Judaism, to learn how we understand our faith, not through the narrative of the New Testament, but as our own self-understanding. I
Right.
can't ask a Christian to do this if I'm not willing to at least study
Yeah.
or engage in their own
Right.
tradition. And I also believe, and I do believe this, and I think it's thoroughly biblical or Jewish, both, and rabbinic, that I believe that we're all children of the One, the Holy One. And I believe that the Holy One reveals his presence. God's presence is revealed among humanity in different cultures, in different ways, through different paradigms, in different images and models and approaches. And so by studying other faith traditions, no matter how different they may be, I'm actually learning more about the fullness
Yeah.
of the divine manifestation within the world. And it also helps me understand more about humanity,
Yeah.
because I relate with them. And also, I always tell them, by the way, don't read what's called the Shmoneh Parakim. It's an introduction to Pirkei Avot, an ethical tractate. I'm part of the Mishnah. Because Maimonides, in his introduction to that, he mentions famous teaching: take or accept the truth, literally hear, but it means accept, hear. Hear or accept the truth from wherever it comes. And you know who he's talking about? What truth he's mentioning? If you read right before that, he's talking about non-Jewish philosophers. So, is Maimonides now out of bounds? He was studying other philosophies and other approaches. So I think it makes good sense, and I think it's peace building, and we should be pursuers of peace.
What you're saying, to use a line from the Swedish theologian and another pioneer, Krister Stendahl.
Oh yeah,
I know you've probably engaged Stendahl's work, who was on the Christian side, a real pioneer.
Yes.
In Jewish-Christian relations and in rethinking some of these key texts. He talked about the importance of leaving room for holy envy in faith traditions that are different from your own. And I guess we could put it in a different way, just seeing God at work, maybe in ways that are outside of what we're used to.
Yeah.
And I think that that's so important in this.
And we're uncomfortable with that sometimes.
We are,
because then,
of course.
Is it a question on our faith?
Right.
And the answer is no.
Yeah.
It's another broader, we have a beautiful way, whatever our faith tradition is.
Yeah.
It's beautiful, but it can't contain the fullness of God. God is broader than any ism.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I love that. Hey, just a quick break to tell you, if you're enjoying this conversation, I want you to know that the Bridge Builders Forum is more than just a podcast. We're a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping Jews and Christians better understand their faith, the Bible, and each other. And your support helps us host these vital conversations and create educational resources and interactive learning experiences. And yes, all donations are tax deductible. To give, just visit bridgebuildersforum.com and click donate. Every gift makes a difference. We appreciate you standing with us. And if we can serve you in any way, send us a message. Now back to the conversation. All right, so I want to pivot a little bit into an area that I think is going to be fun to talk about. We'll see.
Sleep?
Sleep. Let's talk about sleep. A Jewish view of sleep. Yeah. It's called Shabbos. Okay. So, all right. When it comes to Jewish receptions of Paul in modern times, things seem to be very different as compared to Jesus. Multiple Jewish, a lot of Jewish voices, especially in recent times, have said, yes to Jesus, not in a messianic sense, but in a, hey, we see it in a positive way, but Paul never.
Right.
I think that's actually been said by, I think it's been said by a number of voices. Jesus, yes. Paul
Richard
never.
Rubinstein started that. He said that in his book, My Brother Paul. I think that was the name of the book, My Brother Paul.
Yeah.
Or Paul, my brother. I think it's My Brother Paul, but he said that in the 70s.
Yeah, so it's been said in different ways.
I'm Messianic Jew.
Yeah. So I want to hear we're going to talk about Paul a little bit, of course. As you said, I love to talk about Paul. And we've already this morning over coffee talked a good bit about Paul. But first,
I had tea.
You had tea. I had coffee.
I didn't want to wake up.
You probably should have had coffee or two or three. Anyway, but talk to us about why has Paul's Jewishness maybe lagged behind, as compared to Jesus's Jewishness? I would say both in Christian and Jewish circles. Why do you think that it's harder for people to see Paul in Jewish terms?
Okay. Let's go through some texts.
Sure, please.
Not just one or two, but let's see if we can give a world into the mind of Paul that might echo accurately or not.
Yeah.
But let's hear what some of Paul's words are, just like we heard some words about Jews.
Yeah.
Let's hear what Paul says maybe about Judaism, core elements
Jewish
within
stuff,
Judaism.
Circumcision, Torah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Let's
see. Why don't we start off with Romans?
Oh, that's a good place.
Roman.
Let's do it. Man, it looks like you've been getting into that Bible a little bit.
Yeah.
That's good.
I have a Greek one too, but this is an old one.
Okay. So we're going to look at Romans.
Let's go with Romans. Let's start off with Romans 2. I'm going to go through a few verses here.
Yeah.
And I'm very curious about, again, maybe I'd love to have a whole conversation with you on Paul.
Yeah.
Flesh it out a little more.
Yeah. I know our time's limited.
Yes. No, right. Let's go for a few verses. Absolutely. We're not going to analyze them. We're just going to, this is a why, whether we're reading it correctly or not.
Why the reluctance to embrace Paul's Jewishness.
Yes. And again, hear the key themes that he is speaking about and the language that he uses.
Sure.
So in Romans 2, I'll just highlight maybe 5-6 verses here in some of Paul's writings. First of all, he says, let's start with 2:25. For circumcision indeed is of value. That's wonderful. The problem is what comes next.
Yeah.
If you obey the law. Well, no Jew would say that. Circumcision is of value, period, regardless of whether you're a violator of the law. But if you break the law, your circumcision becomes uncircumcision. Okay, I don't know of a Jewish source for that. That doesn't sound Jewish. Let's go to 28. And this is circumcision.
Yeah.
Okay, this is foundational.
Yeah.
We're not talking, do you wear your tzitzis, your tzitzit inside or outside?
Right.
Do you have a knitted kippah or a leather kippah?
If you're negating the value of circumcision,
that's what it sounds like.
You've left the Jewish reservation.
Yes, so there's a problem there. Let's hear a few verses And
Yeah.
verse 28, for no one is a Jew who is merely one outwardly, nor is circumcision outward and physical. But, 29, a Jew is one inwardly, and circumcision is a matter of the heart, by the Spirit, not by the letter. Okay, even if Paul is right, all I'm saying is this doesn't echo well. Circumcision is absolutely physical, and of course it's of the heart.
Yeah, which, I mean, it says that in the
Yes,
in
it
the
does.
Tanakh. Yeah,
Absolutely.
multiple places.
So let's go to
Circumcision of
Romans
the heart, yeah.
5.
Okay. Yeah. So
Well,
back to Romans 2. So if just looking at the verses, that text, I agree, can be understood
absolutely
as if Paul is denigrating a fundamental Jewish practice, aka circumcision.
I don't even know if I would go denigrating. I don't know if I would say that. I would say he has a very, very different understanding.
Okay.
I don't think Paul is seeking here to denigrate. I think he is giving his Damascus Road experience clearly shaped his vision in a way that is unique.
Okay.
Let's go to Romans 3. So we've got circumcision, foundational to Judaism, question. And that's not the only, as we see.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, if we go to, we'll just do it now. I'll just go back to this in a moment, because in Galatians 6, at the end, right at the end of Galatians 6, it's the same theme. It's not the only time, but here.
Yeah, a lot of circumcision stuff.
You ready?
In Galatians,
for neither circumcision counts for anything nor uncircumcision, but a new creation. And who are you a new creation in? 2 Corinthians 5?
Christ.
Mm-hmm. So it again, whether we're interpreting it right or not, this is what it sounds like. We have to take it just on that level right now. So circumcision, not a high view. It sounds like.
Yeah. And it has been understood that way.
Absolutely.
That is, I would say, the mainstream way of understanding
and it's not because they're hateful or ignorant.
No.
It really sounds like that's what it means. So let's go now to law. For by works of the law, no human being will be justified, since through the law comes the knowledge of what? Holiness? No, sin.
Yeah.
Okay. And he says again in 21 and 28, the righteousness of God has been manifested.
You're in Romans 3.
Romans 3.
Yeah.
Romans 3, 21. The righteousness of God has been manifested apart from the law. Verse 28.
Yeah.
Okay. Justified by faith apart from works of the law. Whatever we can parse out law, works of the law, it sounds like law is not being honored in the way that it was. But notice, through the law comes the knowledge of sin. Let's go to Romans 5, 5:20. Now the law came, Romans 5:20. The law came. Hallelujah. Well, what does he say? The law came in to increase the trespass. That's a very different paradigm that isn't going to echo deeply within the Jewish heart, that you're going to get a lot of charismatic amens.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like Psalm 119.
It sure does.
Where Torah is being just like, where there's an oozing love for Torah in Psalm 119.
We'll come to that. Or Psalm 19 also.
There you go.
Law of the Lord is perfect. Ready? For likewise, my brothers, and he was just speaking in 7 verse 1, he was speaking, for do you not know, brothers, for I am speaking to those who know the law. Okay. So, likewise, my brothers, in verse 4, 7:4, you have also died to the law through the body of Christ. Dying to the law. Well,
yeah.
Why? So that you may belong to another. To him, Jesus, who has been raised from the dead, in order that we may bear fruit for God.
Yeah.
So, in other words, if you don't belong to Christ and you are under the law, you are not bearing fruit for God.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. I'll give you 50 of these things,
Right,
but verse 6, but now we are released from the law. Now he says we.
Mm-hmm.
That's not them.
Yeah.
That's
so
we. He's including himself.
Yeah.
And we'll get to that in a moment.
Yeah, the pronouns are important.
Yes, they are.
Yeah.
So, but again, circumcision, real question. Law. What else is there besides Torah and law?
Right.
I mean, and circumcision. So, but 7:6, but now we are released from the law, having died, again, to that which held us captive,
Yeah.
so that we can serve in a new way of spirit. So in other words, law and spirit seem to be in contrast, not in the old way of the written, they say code, but it means the letter.
Yeah. Yeah. The grammar, I think.
It's and then in chapter 7, verse 8, but sin, seizing an opportunity through the commandment, law, commandment, and circumcision, he's touching on all. Sin is through seizing an opportunity through the commandment. I'm putting on a kippah. That's not biblical, but I'm putting on tzitzis. Sin is somehow seizing an opportunity to do what? To produce in me all kinds of covetousness. For apart from the law, sin lies dead. Again, maybe Paul is right. But when you start linking together these verses, and I'm going to give you a few more, the very commandment that promised life. Well, yeah, Eitz Chaim Hi, Lamach Hazikim Ba. It's a tree of life to those who hold fast to it.
Right.
The very commandment that promised life proved to be death for me. For sin, seizing an opportunity through the commandment, deceived me and through it killed me.
So that's the end of Romans 7.
No, it's about halfway through, but that's section. It's a terrible section.
Yeah.
And it gets worse. If we go to 1 Corinthians 9, let me give you 3 more verses. 1 Corinthians 9, I won't even comment that much. To the Jews, I became a Jew in order to win Jews. I guess I said I wasn't going to comment. Here's my non-comment. I don't believe Paul is deceptive. I think that's not what it's saying.
Some do.
I know they do. I just wanted that up front.
But you think he's a straightforward guy.
I don't think wherever we disagree, Paul is an honest seeker.
Straight shooter.
Paul, I would invite regularly for my Shabbos. I would.
Yeah.
I don't invite dishonest people. Paul is an honest seeker. He has a new vision. He has re-envisioned Torah.
Yeah.
He had re-envisioned Judaism in a way that has some very, very, I should say this up front. I am a deep, deep admirer of Paul. I want this known. I didn't say that in the beginning.
Yeah, I know.
I have my struggles, but I am a deep admirer of Paul. Okay? He has some brilliance to him. But
and you see him as loving his people.
Yes.
He's not
and
a
loving
self-hating
Torah
Jew.
and loving Judaism, but he has a very different paradigm.
Yes.
So to the Jews I became a Jew in order to win Jews. To those under the law, this is the problem for me. To those under the law, this isn't my problem. I became as one under the law. Here's the problem. This is huge. To those under the law, I became as one under the law, though not being myself under the law. That is not a statement to Gentiles. That is a self-identifying statement. And in the Greek, it is emphatic. In the Greek, it is emphatic. Me on autos hupa naman. It's emphatic in the Greek. He says he's not under the law. People try and say he's not under the Pharisaic stringencies, hogwash. Maybe not hogwash. This is a Jewish program.
Yeah.
I don't buy it. I should be.
You're not persuaded.
I'm not persuaded, especially in light of 50 other sentences.
Yeah.
Let's go to this one. I got to give you 2 more.
All right.
2 more.
All right. Give me 2 more.
2 more.
Because you're making
2 more. 2 more. Again, law, commandment, circumcision, Torah. You ready?
I'm ready.
1 Corinthians 15.
Yeah.
Near the end. The sting of death is sin. Absolutely. Yeah. He should have stopped there. The sting of death is sin. The power of sin.
It's death.
No.
The law.
Is the law.
Yeah.
He has married 2 terms that are not ever found together like that in Judaism. He has others. And when the power of sin is the law. The law was there as the counter.
Yeah.
As the barrier. As the way of living a holy life. Not sin. The power of sin is the law. But thanks be to God who gave us victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. Law and sin don't go together like that in Judaism. Jesus, whatever there may have been in terms of differences between Jesus and the Pharisees or Jesus and modern rabbinic Judaism, it's not that. It's not that language. That's troubling language. However we interpret it, it's still, even if there is a way out that I don't see, it's the language we have to admit is troubling. I've spoken to people who don't even see it's troubling. And I'm thinking, then you're just not reading it. It is troubling. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been kicked out of the synagogues.
Right.
He wasn't kicked out for saying things that were harmonious.
Yeah.
And in line with. There were struggles, obviously. And maybe he's right, and maybe I'm misunderstanding. Fine. I accept that. I try to understand. I read the Paul within Judaism community.
Yeah.
I really do. And I don't see their answers or their resolutions often as very satisfying. Often, to be honest, they don't address the most challenging verses.
Yeah.
I'm not kidding you.
No, I know.
I looked through several of them, and 10 books or 11
books.
books, they didn't even touch on it. And one, in fact, touched on the verse for 12 pages, but not on the problematic part of the verse itself. The other, I think, way out, which is, well, he's only speaking to Gentiles. That's a common response.
We talked about that earlier. Yeah.
Well, I don't think he's talking to Gentiles because he includes himself. And if we could go through other verses next time when we do maybe a whole talk on Paul.
Yeah.
It's not a satisfying response. That's an easy way out. And then I think there's a cheap criticism, which I've heard. It's happened to me, and I've heard it at conferences. You're reading it through the lens of the Protestant Reformation. Well, no, I'm not, and neither are they. This is a very fair way. It might be wrong, but it seems like it's an honest way of reading the text. And to use Jewish language, it seems like it's the pshat. When you get 50 of these, maybe it really is saying what it's saying. So I do struggle with Paul being, now I never would question, this is important. I don't think Paul ever considered himself as leaving Judaism. I don't think he thinks his statements here are without. I think he sees this as the fulfillment and the realization of Judaism. His identity in his being, his kishkas, maybe he didn't use that word, I don't know, but
yeah, good one.
His kishkas, he was a yid.
Insides,
he was a yid. His guts, his bowels, his innards. He was a Jew to the core. But his encounter on the Damascus Road really did give him a new vision, and maybe even a true vision, the correct vision that we're not able to see, some of us in the Jewish world. So he is a Jew. I would never deny his Judaism or his identity or his heart for the Jewish people.
Yeah. No, so well said. And I mean, I think you've just answered the question that I asked earlier with, I mean, obviously you have thought and studied and wrestled with these texts. And I think that you've presented so many of the texts and the hot button texts that have made, a lot of Jewish people and Jewish commentators very reluctant about Paul. And those same texts, Christians have looked at those and not really seen a character that continued to be a practitioner or advocate of Judaism. He was starting something different. And so I think that is, for understandable reasons, as there's so many other things I want to talk about today, but just to, my take on it, obviously I have a different take, and we just don't have the time.
Sure.
But I would love to have another, offline and online
Yes.
conversation.
Thank you.
Obviously, this is
Me
going to be
too.
an ongoing discussion that we have. And even
Great.
this morning, we were at a coffee shop, and I said, "Oh, Joe, is there a camera here somewhere that's recording what we're saying?"
That's because he
we
wanted
got
to
further-
get me sprawled out on the couch.
You were, yeah, because you had just gotten off the plane. And anyway, but no, I do, again, certainly now's not the time to like go through each of these texts and me to say, well, Joe, here's where I think,
Okay.
where I disagree. But I do think that those texts certainly can be understood, in a very, let's just say, Jewish negative way. But I think they also can be understood in an alternative way that has Paul being very specific statements. Because just to take, for example, the topic of circumcision.
Okay.
Sure, we've got a number of statements in Romans, in Galatians, in Philippians, where Paul is saying things that sound very negative. My take on his negative statements towards circumcision is that he was against circumcision for Gentiles who have embraced Christ as a means for them to enter God's family. In other words, Gentiles don't have to become Jews in order to enter God's family. So I think that's why, like, he can turn right around. You were in Romans 2, you were reading those verses from Romans 2. And then, we turn to the beginning of Romans 3, and then Paul turns right around and says, what's the value of circumcision? Much in every way. So it's like, okay, how do we put that affirmative statement, or in Romans 7, he turns right around and says, so then the law is holy. And then he says it's spiritual.
Yeah,
and so it's like,
okay. No, I didn't know. It's so funny. I'm loving the holy potential here for a dialogue.
Yeah.
Romans 7:12, where it is holy. If I were the editor, I would have taken that out. We'll talk about that next time. But I agree with you, Paul. In general, I do think Paul. We differ maybe on the extent of Paul's reference to circumcision, but I absolutely agree. I'm just leaving you with the last word with agreement. I do believe he was absolutely and rightfully opposed to Gentiles having to circumcise themselves to be in relationship with God. I agree with you on that.
Okay.
But I think there's a broader context that also, but I agree specifically with you on that. Absolutely.
Yeah, no, and again, so much more to discuss there. But I think that, again, I appreciate you've given a good answer as to why there's been the reluctance on Paul's Jewishness.
Especially
but
for
also,
those
I
who
think
don't know. If somebody doesn't know and that's all they hear, that's going to cause great distance.
Yeah. But I'm very thankful for the work of people that I know you're engaging deeply with, whether it's Mark Nanos or I know you've been a guest at Lund University with Magnus and Corinne Zetterholm, and and these again are thinkers that are seeking to take those same texts that you look at and see them in a way that sees really Paul in a very Torah circumcision positive light. But again, there's a lot to consider here that's challenging to work through. But I appreciate you sharing your perspective on it.
I'm giving a talk, and by the way, at Lund, I gave an hour talk in praise, the highest poetic and philosophical praise of Paul, not with any but, no condition. It was unconditional, absolute. Glorious praise.
I know. You
and
think
then
highly of them.
in Sweden, in Uppsala, at the International Society of Biblical Literature and the European Association of Biblical Scholars, they're having a conference. I'm there on the other side. I'm going to be the one critic getting hammered. But I will give a lot more there that I didn't give here, and I look forward to. I'll send you the paper.
Of course. How do Christian audiences receive you? Because I know you have opportunities where you said about even in a shul, in a synagogue, you had a Christian audience in there. But I know you have a lot of experience. I know you love to engage and speak to Christian audiences and individuals. How are you received as far as your kind of your perspective on these issues?
One of my favorite, engagements that I've ever had doing Jewish-Christian dialogue was when I taught the Sermon on the Mount to a convent group of nuns, and there were priests also at the church next door. We would spend an hour every time I was in town. I would spend an hour on one verse from the Beatitudes.
Wow.
And it was heavenly.
Oh, I bet.
So there are groups that are just open sponges, just wanting to receive.
Yeah.
You also have, which is sad, I've been told I wanted to do Passover at certain places, of all things. How wrong is Passover, right? Yeah. It's only in all 4 Gospels. Jesus did it.
Yeah.
They said that's Jewish legalism. That's what Jesus came to end. And I thought, wow, I'm ending this conversation. But really, I did try actually, because I thought it was an opportunity. I thought, I understand what you're saying. And we continue. It didn't go anywhere. It didn't go anywhere, unfortunately. Others within the Christian world, just like in all communities, they're just not particularly interested. So you have those who are, amen, hallelujah, those who aren't interested, and those who view it as Jesus came to free us. We're not under law, we're under grace. That's another Romans caricature.
Right.
But those are the reactions that I've received.
Yeah, no, I hear you. What do you, along this line of sort of your engagement with Christian audiences and individuals, what would you say? And again, we're going to kind of start pivoting and turning towards the close of our conversation here. What are a couple common misunderstandings that you see frequently that Christians have about Judaism? What would you say? Just a couple, one or two. What are some kind of big ideas that you think? All right, here's something that I hear a lot, and a big thing. Yeah. Not just why do we wear a kippah or things like that. Yeah.
So a misunderstanding
that Christians often have,
and
about
that I would like
Judaism.
them, and also what I would like. Also, how about in addition to that, what I would like them to possibly know? Yeah, not just in context of the misunderstanding, right? But what would I like to leave them with? Besides, here's a nice interpretation of Genesis 1:1.
Like for example, I would say that I'll just give you one from my own experience, is that I find that it's like very common for Christians to think that Judaism believes and has always believed that you have to earn your way, earn your relationship with God, earn your, to use a Christian term, earn your salvation, and so forth, and works-based righteousness. And I would say that is a very big idea. That's a common assumption, but that's really not something that Judaism believes on its own terms. Judaism is very much based on an idea of a gracious, merciful God who this relationship is based on that mercy and forgiveness. Okay.
Yes, but
so that's just
that's a good one. That's a good one. And I don't think it's as neat as either community likes to make it out. It's all all works-based righteousness, or we're not works. We're both grace-based. I do think certainly works are involved in Judaism, Torah, law, differently commandment than it is in Christianity, but it's absolutely rooted in grace. Yeah. But I would say another area that is, I think, grossly misunderstood. I've been asked this question. I wear a hat outside instead of this because I don't want to get asked questions everywhere. Okay. I don't mind often talking, but I don't want it to be every time I go out. Right. And it's often, and maybe some other reasons now I'm a little nervous. Sure. But I've been asked, in Judaism, you don't have forgiveness. How can you be forgiven? Because you don't have Jesus. Right. And so we have a, I think that's a big one. It is a big one. And you know what? I don't even take offense at most of these questions because they're coming from a place of honesty. Yeah. And they want the best for you. As long as they're not, shoving tracts in your face and but an honest question and dialogue is always beautiful. Yeah. And I do enjoy it. I see them as wishing the best. They want me to be in that same place that they feel is only found through the person of Jesus. So I take it with the best of intent
Yeah.
or intense so that I can then respond with the best. So I think that's one area that is another area that is often misunderstood about Judaism. And I think another one,
and just I want to make sure we close that route, because what you're saying is that it's a misunderstanding, but there is a massive idea about forgiveness within Judaism, very, very much so.
Yes, and maybe I'll work in, and here's something I wish Christians, maybe not specifically on that topic, but more broadly, what I wish would be, I actually wish it for all people of faith, but we're talking Judaism and Christianity today. I wish that Christians had a greater interest in understanding Judaism on its own terms. Just a genuine interest, not to study it and make it. I know people who know the Bible, who can quote it better than I can, who are Christians. They know it very well. But there's not an interest, not that they have to be Jewish or anything. Right. I mean, not that they even have to do this. I'm just telling you what I wish. I wish that many Christians who don't see the beauty and the light and the wisdom within the Jewish way, I wish they sought not just to learn what they would call the Old Testament, Tanakh. I wish they would seek to find why Judaism sees such beauty in their approach, because they're obviously missing it. It's very hard for us often to appreciate the other because we view it through our own lens, so we don't even see it often. So I wish those questions were still asked, but I wish often that they can't even hear it sometimes because they're seeing it or hearing it through their own theological lens. And
it's so true.
I try to hear. In fact, I'll tell you something. I did this. I often go to many different churches, even the charismatic churches, even charismatic churches on steroids, like the holiness churches. Oh, I love it. I do.
Yeah.
Oh, when I can find. Oh, I love it. And I was at one once, at a charismatic, not the holiness one, but I was at a charismatic church. It was all dark, thousands of people. And I'm often moved deeply, and I'm grateful that I'm being touched because it means I'm open to hearing the holy of the other.
The holy envy. Yeah.
And not just hearing it and saying, but it's really not. You're misinterpreting. To hear their just holy wisdom, holy inspiration. And I stood in the back. I knew this was going to be I knew what I was in for. I stayed in the back where I don't know anybody. Everybody in the front knows me. And there's thousands of people. I was in the back, and it was dark, except for the stage. I never get down. I never raise my hands. I never bow as much as I feel like it.
Yeah.
I did once. I bowed. I was on the floor, and it was heavenly.
Wow.
It was heavenly.
Wow.
Did my theology change? Something changed. That I know because I was deeply touched.
Right.
But I appreciated the beauty of their expression, of their ritual, of their sacred music, of their way, in such a way that I participated, but I remained who I was.
Yeah.
It was just glory flowing through.
You were seeing God at work in the midst.
I didn't see anything. My eyes were closed, but I was filled with something. It was glorious, and this will probably get me in more trouble. Thanks.
I know this is recorded.
Remember, I haven't had any sleep, so maybe I'm just sleep talking.
We'll throw it off to that.
No, it's true. It was glorious. I'll never forget it.
That's amazing.
I'll never forget it.
You're a great example, Rabbi Joe, of just I think you have a pattern here that I'm seeing as I'm getting to know you better, and even within this conversation. You are, I think you set a great example of the importance of learning about learning from adherence, learning about other ways of seeing texts and faith and all these things from adherents, not enemies. And that was another fundamental of Christopher Stendhal in he had these three pillars of Jewish Christian relations, but even broader in interfaith dialogue. Ask adherents, not enemies, because by going into that church, you could actually experience it and see it for yourself, and engaging the text. And so I think that's really important. And again, I just appreciate your example with that.
Thank you.
Let's wrap this up. We're running low on time. I have one more question. I think it'll be a good landing spot. This is a bit theoretical, but
I just had a little more vodka, so I'm ready. No sleep and vodka.
That's
what
later,
a combo.
Oh my gosh.
You're asking for
Rabbi
it.
Joe.
It's water, folks.
Yeah. Anyway, if you could speak to a room full of pastors and rabbis, so you got a mixed audience, leaders though, these are leaders, about Jewish-Christian relations, what would you want them to hear from you? And I think you have earned the right to give an answer to this question. What would you want them to hear from you about how to advance friendship and understanding between Jews and Christians within their communities? How do they advance friendship and understanding, which I think go hand in hand
between the community? So
you got a bunch of leaders. You've got 10, 15, 20 minutes. And this maybe this has actually happened. If it hasn't, I hope it will, because I think there's a lot of pastors and rabbis that need to hear how you would answer this question.
Okay, thank you.
How do we advance Jewish-Christian understanding and friendship?
I would actually start not with friendship, with advancing friendship. I would start first with simply making an acquaintance with. Let's just get acquainted with each other. Friendship is deep. I know that's the ultimate vision.
Yeah, no, I get it.
But start off there. There's no pressure. We're just meeting. Let's get acquainted with each other. And not just simply with, oh, you wear this and I wear this.
Yeah.
And you wear these out and I wear it under. I don't mean with just the characteristics, the basics. I mean, let's get acquainted with each other in ways that acquaintances don't often begin, where we're starting with something of I would say there's a dependency or an urgency, because we need to have this friendship.
Yeah.
We need to be together. So let's start off as acquaintances with the understanding that there is a deficit, there is a gap, and there is an urgency that we must come together as people and communities of faith. But let's start off as acquaintances. Get acquainted. Let's get to know one another on a deeper way. And I would say even get together with those with whom you might have a very different ideological approach, because that's where you're really going to discover how you can be in the presence of another. Make a community with those who aren't necessarily a carbon copy of yourself. That would be the first. Make an acquaintance with someone who actually isn't just another. If you're a liberal Jew, you make it with a liberal Christian. If you're a conservative or an Orthodox Jew, you make it with somebody who has more traditional values like you. Find those who are the other that you can be in community with. And then hopefully that acquaintance will become a friend and the communities will become more friendly in spite of maybe our different approaches. And then I would say, come to this meeting with a deep and open heart of acceptance.
Yeah.
We have differences and we can be in community, but not if I don't accept that you have another approach.
We've got to be honest about those differences.
And we're not.
Yeah.
And especially on certain hot button issues, I know this, I have seen it.
Yeah.
I've seen it within families. You've got to start with, on the way. Now that we're together, there has to be, if there's not going to be acceptance, let's not even come together. Deep acceptance from not intellect, but heart. Realize that we're dependent on each other. We need this.
Yeah.
Each other, even though we are other. I come with openness and acceptance for our differences in life, faith, philosophy. The last one I would say is that's what you come with.
Mm-hmm.
My hope is that coming with an openness to make a deep acquaintance that is going to become a friendship, coming with this realization that we are lacking. There's a deficit in my life, in my spiritual community if we're not together. Coming with an open heart that is willing to accept the other. I would say, now make sure you leave with a heart that is filled with gratitude for the encounter.
Yeah.
Filled with, overflowing with gratitude, because gratitude is contagious.
Yeah.
Gratitude is healing. Gratitude is redeeming. It's a pillar in Jewish thought. It's what we wake up with in the morning.
Yeah.
A gratitude prayer.
Modeh yeah. Yeah. I gratefully thank you, O living and eternal King. You return my soul within me. Abundant is your faithfulness.
So I'm grateful
Yeah.
for this. Thank you.
Oh, this has been a great conversation.
Thank you.
I want to thank you.
Yes.
You made a great effort to be here with me in person. I think it's important we did it in person.
Yeah.
And it really makes a difference. I know.
Sorry, I'm half asleep.
No, you did great. I just want you to know I appreciate all you're doing to encourage Jews and Christians to learn together, to listen. Mm-hmm. And to listen to each other. I think we've only scratched the surface. I think something you and I both know in our respective works in this world is that we've really only just begun this work of bridge building. But I'm glad to be working with you to help Jews and Christians to better understand their faith, the Bible, each other. And so thanks for this conversation. Looking forward and to be continued. All right.
Thanks. You. Love you.
Hey, I would love to connect with you further, so feel free to leave a comment or send me a private message. And the best way for us to stay in touch is to sign up for the Bridge Builders Forum email at bridgebuildersforum.com. This will keep you informed of cutting-edge resources and opportunities for us to connect and learn together. Additionally, the Bridge Builders Forum is a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and your support helps us create content that overcomes misunderstandings and advances ideas that build bridges between Jews and Christians. So we'll be back soon to discuss more ideas that help Jews and Christians better understand their faith, the Bible, and each other.